When we look at the history of Silicon Valley, there's really two things you look at as a venture capitalist, and the two things you should be looking at as an entrepreneur in the same way. One of them is like, what are the top talent doing? How could you get the top talent to work with you? But it's usually top technical talent, top engineering talent. And then the second one is like, what's possible now that was not possible 5 years ago? The talent question is not nearly as intellectually interesting to sit and talk about. It's just, you just kind of got to figure it out and you got to map it out. One advantage of being in a great place like UT is you guys have a lot of top talent coming out of here. So probably your biggest job in school is to like get to know the other most talented engineering students and figure out, get them to like you, get them to want to work with you, because that's a huge advantage if you want to be an entrepreneur or if you want to invest in great entrepreneurs. I think the more interesting question is like, what's possible now? And so what you have in the history of technology world is you have these trends that end up happening because certain things become possible at a given time, right? Certain breakthroughs make certain new companies possible. The first really big wave in Silicon Valley, which was been kind of in the center, of U.S. innovation for a long time, was the electronics wave, right? So the top two students at Stanford, there's a really famous professor, Terman, an engineering professor, brought them together, and they created an electronics company named after themselves. You guys know which one I'm talking about? Yeah, that's right, exactly. Great book on the history of the Valley called Bill and Dave, which is about Hewlett-Packard. And they brought, for 20, 30 years, a lot of the best people to Silicon Valley with that. And, there were probably 1,000 big electronics companies, but they were by far the biggest. So the first wave was this electronics wave. And I think that the second big wave is what we call the semiconductor wave. And it was really started off by Shockley. If you guys remember, I don't know if you know your tech history, but this guy won the Nobel Prize for inventing the transistor along with two others. And he identified who he thought were the 8 most talented upcoming people in that space from in the academic world but people who wanted to do business with. And he brought them out to near where his mom lived in Palo Alto and Stanford. And it turned out, it's actually quite funny, this guy Shockley was a real jerk. He was a terrible boss. It was called Shockley Labs. He kept giving them lie detector tests. It was like they could not work for this guy. And so the 8 of them left, and they're called the traitorous 8 in Silicon Valley history. And the name of our firm, 8VC, is partly an homage to these guys. And these 8 people, one of them was Moore of Moore's Law, right? You guys probably all know Moore's Law about it was the idea that the power of these chips, they would double every 18 months because you'd fit twice as many transistors. It was Eugene Kleiner who helped build these, Fairchild and Kleiner Perkins. It was the guys who started National and Intel. So it was really important, really key group, and that kind of set off this wave of all these semiconductor companies. With they left and started Fairchild, and they did National, the rest of it, and then the third big wave of companies. I think this is the proper way to understand it. Was the enterprise software companies, and really what was going on with Eugene Kleiner, starting Kleiner, with the guys leaving Intel and starting Sequoia, and with the other people starting other funds is there was. They're trying to make money, but they were also trying to create software programs so they could sell computer chips. Because suddenly you had computers in all these industries, you're not going to be able to sell them these computer chips if you couldn't have software to use in logistics and government and et cetera. So it's really interesting. If you go into a lot of big government departments, even today, you go into certain parts of banks, certain parts of railroad companies. There's software basically from the 70s still running a lot of this stuff because it was good enough, and they sold at that time. And so you get this big wave, kind of late 60s to 80s, of enterprise software. And this was all what we consider very boring software, at least for me. It's very linear. It's very get things done, A to B to C. It's black and green screens, black and white. But it was really important. It actually massively raised productivity in our economy. If you go look at what this did for things before it was there, right? Because you can imagine all this stuff was done by hand before. And then of course it starts where it gets a little messy. But I think the right way to think of the next two waves. One was what we call the networking wave. So you had companies like Sun Microsystems, like Cisco Systems. My mentor, John Chambers, scaled Cisco from 2 to 50 billion revenue. And these companies helped everything connect and talk to each other. And along with that, you basically had the possibility of the internet emerge, and these companies then helped the networking, power the internet. And the internet led to the consumer wave. So consumer was Web 1.0, which is like Amazon, Google, Yahoo, all that stuff, Alta Vista, whatever, all this stuff going on Web 1.0. That was a big bubble. I kind of lived through that at the end of high school because I'm a lot older than you guys. And then it was Web 2.0, which was like Facebook, LinkedIn, et cetera, and all the things that you did there, learning new ways of interacting with people online dynamically. And then it was the mobile wave, and so there are a bunch of new companies there. So there's kind of 3 subwaves within this big consumer wave. And then after that, that's the point at which kind of all of our pop culture kind of got to be aware of tech, and tech was a big thing. Most people everyone's aware tech was going on, but that all of a sudden it was really, really valuable, right? And if you look today, the value created by the consumer wave, I think it's even with the market down, it's 80% of the value of everything basically in the last 60, 70 years. It's these companies, huge companies that changed our whole economy. So a lot of people only think of the consumer wave, but I think that's a mistake. The last kind of 15 years, really ever since the phones came out, there hasn't really been new paradigm shifts that allow you to build a Google again or a Facebook again. There's not something new you could do in the consumer wave. If you're trying to start a competitor to one of those, during this like 14-year period, you probably just can't do it. There's too many modes. It's too hard. Sorry?
You know these trends that you're mentioning that happened before with like HP or Sun Micro that built the foundations for Silicon Valley? Are you seeing any similar looking trends anywhere else in the world today?
Yes. So when I talk about Silicon Valley, I mean the tech world writ large. I'm friends with Michael Dell and Lamont and all these guys who brought talent here and built things here as well. I think Dell and some of the chip companies here were an important part of that same story, right? So at the same time chip companies were there was here. Silicon Valley had a network effect for a while where it was the majority of the value. One of the reasons I moved from California to Austin in the last 3 years, if you look at our investing, trying to invest in the very biggest, most important things, that was about 90% in Silicon Valley for a long time. That's been trending down steadily. It's probably about 45, 50% now, which I think is about right for what's going on. So what happened is that, and the pandemic's accelerated this a lot, but it became possible to have great tech cultures everywhere. People started realizing how to do great tech cultures on the East Coast. There was the old thing like 15 years ago where you'd make fun of a company. It was either like a West Coast tech culture or an East Coast tech culture, and they'd be totally different, right? The East Coast one would be top down. There'd be a business guy yelling at the engineers wouldn't have any upside. There'd be all these like things that they were wrong with it. And that still happens, by the way, in Washington, D.C. and the government places is a mess. But in terms of like companies now in New York, companies in Florida and Atlanta and in Boston, like they've learned the lessons, and so you have tech cultures everywhere. In terms of other places in the world, Israel is a lot of great stuff. You're seeing stuff in London, Paris, Berlin. You're seeing stuff in Stockholm. India has like really, really gone up the last 10 years. So I think I led my first Series A directly I've ever done there like maybe 4 years ago. Now I actually have a team as we speak of 4 people, including one of my kind of chiefs of staff who's there right now as we speak, either in Chennai or Bangalore or somewhere. I don't even know where he is today. But no, we're doing a lot more around the world. I think Beijing obviously has been huge. I think since you asked the question, I'm going off target a little bit here. Interesting geopolitical thing. Like a lot of us were very bullish on China 15 years ago. I even gave a speech in Chinese to a group like this, but I had to practice a lot, try to copy Mark Zuckerberg, And my wife speaks more fluently than me. She says it was barely intelligible, but and then it became. I got to know a lot of people who run China, and they were. Fortunately, we got good relationships, and they were like, honestly, Joe, none of the stuff you're working on, these big industries, will be allowed to win in China. It's just not. You have to be local. You have to be on the inside. You can invest in some stuff, but you can't build stuff here. You can't take your companies here. And then even much more than that. So I backed off. And then about 4 years ago, Xi Jinping started basically, and this, I apologize if it offends people, but he really kind of decapitated the tech industry there. So in the US, one of the dirty secrets you don't really talk about is there's entrepreneurs, but there's also people who have been successful who are still building. And probably like half the important companies are created by people who are still building, right? And maybe even more than half these days because there's so many of us. And I've been lucky to help found 6 companies that are unicorns now. I'd like to do another 6 in the next decade, and along with investing. I would not be doing that if I was in China. And we know a lot of people who have done things like this in China, and they just are not building companies. They're terrified because a lot of them are disappearing. A lot of them are having random heart attacks. A lot of them are literally falling off cliffs, getting in car accidents, and like the numbers are just too much. Like I'm sure some of the car accidents were real, but if you look at the numbers statistically, it's like clearly a lot of them were knocked off, and a lot of them had their companies taken away. So people are afraid to build in China right now. I think India is going to usually surpass China in the next 10 years because the talent there is great. I used to only use India for back-end stuff. Now we're seeing like really, really great tech cultures there. So anyway, that was a divergence. But yeah, I think it's super interesting what's going on around the world. Part of the reason I'm in Austin is I love Austin, partially because I have to be on the East Coast. We have a company in Oklahoma City. We have companies in Tennessee. I have companies, companies in Minnesota. We have stuff all in healthcare. Right? There's stuff all over the country now, which was not the case 10, 15 years ago. So this for me has become more of a central place to base out of to do things around the country. Now that said, I still have a big office in San Francisco and Silicon Valley because there's certain things that are still the best in the world out there, and there's a certain network there, and from India, from other places as well. But to get back to these waves, there's these 5 big waves, right? Electronics, semiconductors, old enterprise software, networking, all the consumer waves. I think the 6th one, which was not as big as the 5th, but was very big, was what we call the smart enterprise wave. I wrote a lot about this 12 years ago. Basically what you did is for the first time, you went back to the old enterprise wave and you replaced a lot of those systems from 40, 50, 60 years ago. And the thing is, why do they need to be replaced? They're working for 40 years. Well, what happened with the cloud and with all the data from the mobile ecosystem available is you had all these new like nonlinear workflows that use data to do better processes in specific industries that were impossible to do on top of the old systems. And so for the first time, because of the cloud, it was like you can get people to replace the old systems. And this is extremely valuable because if you can get someone to replace their old system for a really valuable use case and workflow, you could then have this thing that's in the middle that has all the data and information for them. Then you can build other workflows on top of it. You can open up. Other people could do apps on top of it. And Corey was mentioning Qualia. One of my interns 10 years ago, really bright guy, 22. We backed him to found this thing in title insurance. Title insurance is a weird industry, super broken. We're always trying to find like how our industry's broken. Let's go fix them. And he ended up kind of owning the workflow where I think some large percent of transactions that use title go over his software now. And now there's like 50 companies that plug into his software and do different parts of that workflow. So when you own it for one thing, you own it for lots of things. So this smart enterprise wave, we wrote a lot about it 10, 11 years ago. We said there'd probably be 200-300 companies that were they're billion-dollar plus companies coming into it. It seems to be been about right. We started a bunch of those. We invested in 30 or 40 of them. So that's been a really good wave the last 12 years. It's interesting. The areas where it's still possible to build new companies there are the ones that, for various reasons, are hard to do. Right. So the way innovation works is you'll have a new possibility thanks to the cloud, thanks to mobile ecosystem, thanks to new big data frameworks, and those will kind of go into the areas. This is thinking of things at system level, but those will go into the areas first where there's not big barriers, where the businesses are really able to adopt things quickly. They'll go into the areas last that are highly regulated, that are hard to work in, that have lots of reasons why they don't adopt new things. So what are those areas that are hard to work in, that are more regulated, that are more broken? It's like parts of government, parts of healthcare, right? There's lots of natural monopolies there. These people don't quickly adopt things. It's parts of the very regulated big banking systems, which also they spend billions of dollars on their own stuff. So it's very slow to kind of break in and very risky to change. But you are starting to see it change. So those are types of things that we're still doing new things in smart enterprise for those areas. I think it's a lot harder today to start a smart enterprise company than it was 10 years ago. Because again, you have to have a reason when you're starting something. Why wasn't this already done by tens of thousands of other very smart people who were trying to use what was possible, right? So starting a company is really hard. You're kind of making like a hypothesis about something that should exist in the world. I think that's the right way to see the venture capital part of this. Is like we have this economic engine, and the venture capital side is like taking new possibilities and like testing them out and proving them out. And if you're not proving a new hypothesis, and it's almost like a scientific kind of experiment. If you're not kind of thinking of it a little bit that way, you might not be doing something that's going to be a really big company, right? Because it's not going to be too new. That's my framework anyway.